When you care about current affairs, it's on the OSHOW.
Welcome to the OSHOW, Canada's current affairs show with strong opinions. I'm your host, Laura Babcock. And in case you missed it, Mr. Ford went to Washington and failed epically. Embarrassing. And in case you missed it, and the latest polls, Mr. Mark Carney is on his way to Ottawa, and he's likely to succeed. We're talking a potential Liberal majority, which is why there's a big scramble afoot to bring back Parliament, to end this prorogation, and to quickly try to get Pierre Poilievre in as Prime Minister. I've got an issue with that because there are people in the Trump campaign that want to have Pierre Poilievre as Prime Minister, including Elon Musk. And if you're paying attention, Canada and Ontario, these are fraught times. And the last thing we need is the regime that would invade us, something that Trump has reiterated in front of the largest audience in the US during the Super Bowl. They want Canada. He has said it. We now know it. And therefore, we should have nobody anything adjacent to the Trump regime running anything in Canada. Not our country, not Ontario, not Alberta, not anywhere. We are in an economic war that is meant to break us and to take us. And I'm very alarmed, but we're also not going to just roll over. We are going to fight, and we are going to make our country stronger than ever. And I know two people who help with that every single time that they join me here on the OSHOW. That is, of course, Keith Leslie, legendary Queen's Park reporter from Ontario, who's now living on the East Coast, and Mark Cripps, who worked in government, was a publisher in a legacy media back in the day, and always brings exactly what's in his heart and his mind. And I know that resonates because clips from the last OSHOW Scandal Panel had hundreds of thousands of views if we total them up. And it's because all of you are paying attention. You're sharing the podcast. You're subscribing on YouTube. You're watching it across all the socials. And I want to thank you because the conversation we're about to have today is unscripted, uncut, as usual. But I know that these guys have a hell of a lot to say. So let me start, as we always do, on the OSHOW Scandal Panel with Keith Leslie. Keith, from your wisdom, from your viewpoint, from your tracking of the Ontario election, which is coming up February 27th, and everything else, all the shenanigans in Washington, and the latest polls in Ottawa, where do you want to start, my wise friend?
Well, you mentioned the Premier's trip to Washington. All the premiers, not just Premier Ford, but all the premiers went down. And at the very last, he had a couple of speeches, which turned out the media quickly discovered were mostly Canadian businessmen in Washington. Right. But still, he delivered his message. And then at the very last minute, somehow, through some strange thing, someone arranged a meeting in the White House with the Deputy Chief of Staff for Foreign Subnational Government Representatives, or some guy we've never heard of. But the premiers at least got that meeting in the White House with somebody. Meanwhile, Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc, the federal finance minister, is also meeting in the White House with Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary. So that's at least some serious shit going down there. That's what we need to see, at least. I don't know how far he got, but at least he's talking to the Commerce Secretary, not some Deputy Chief of Staff for whatever, like how many of them, dozens of them under Trump. Right. So this guy, though, after the meeting with the premiers, comes running out. And here's the headline all across Canada today from the premiers meeting going to Washington is, White House official says, I never promised Canada wouldn't be a 51st state. Never agreed to that. I said I'd take that message to Donald Trump. This is what we got out of this? That we're back to this 51st state nonsense? And that's all they got as a headline. And this guy making it very emphatic. We can't discount this nonsense.
Yeah.
This whole economic force that Trump promised to use, he said at the time it would be to get us to become a 51st state. Here's an official, and this is what this official took away after meeting with 13 Canadian premiers in the White House. He comes running out and posts online right away. No. I never agreed that we would that Canada would never be a 51st state. We didn't say that. So this is actually part of their priority, part of the tariff war, part of all this, or at least, and he said as well, listen to what the president says, listen to his words. Well, his words have been pretty emphatic and nonstop about Canada not being a viable country and all this kind of nonsense. And we know that, their economy is 10 times the size of ours. So if they want to economically beat us to death, they can do it. Although I don't know if steel and aluminum in particular is the way to go, especially when we also heard confirmation from the White House this week that they put on the 25% on steel and aluminum. Oh, and when the next review, when that 30-day pause on the other 25% comes off, they're going to be added on top. It's going to be 50% on steel and aluminum. How's that going over? Like, seriously, that's just going to cause factories to shut down, orders to stop. Investment is already drying up in both countries because, well, more probably goes to the U.S., but investment in Canada is just on hold. Who's going to invest here when we need to get to the U.S. market? So all of this, the premiers, as I say, our friend and commentator Amanda Galbraith likened them to the Beverly Hillbillies going to Washington. I don't know if that was fair. But on the other hand, from a campaign point of view, this is 2 days that the premier got to leave the province in the middle of an election campaign, right in the middle of it, and talk about the one issue he actually really, really wants to stay on track of and talk about nonstop is, protecting Ontario, protecting Canada from the tariffs. And he got to be in the picture, the center of the picture, leading forward from all the other premiers. That's, it's playing. So from a campaign strategy point of view, bang on. It played right to him. And the opposition parties in Ontario, they really want to talk about the problems with the Ford government, their bad record, healthcare, all these other issues that need to be talked about, affordability. But they can't really position themselves on the tariff thing because then they're just playing into him. And every time we're talking about the tariffs, it plays into him. They can't really get in on that story. So it's from a campaign point of view, these were 2 days very effective. And then he's taking today off to prep for the Northern debate. So that's 3 solid days where basically Ford is not distracted from his message at all. And it plays across the country. He still comes across, like he's making the talking points. He was talking about aluminum and how much it would hurt the Americans right away and how quickly they can't come up to capacity and all. Very informed. And, aluminum's not Ontario's issue. It's more Quebec and BC. But he was there as the Captain Canada thing. So he's campaigning, very effective. Mm-hmm. Overall, getting information through to Trump and making any dent in the White House, I think Dominic LeBlanc's one meeting went a lot further than the 13 premiers were able to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that Ford, it was performative. He even cut a cheesy video and posted it of, how he's taken the message to America, when in fact the media finally exposed the fact that his audiences at the Chamber of Commerce down there in Washington was mostly Canadians. They couldn't even get American business people to talk. Ford came out and did a presser in front of the big back set that we all paid for of the White House, or Capitol Hill, wherever he was, trying to make the point that, he had big meetings in Washington, but he wouldn't say who he met with. And to your point, Keith, the Trump administration does what it always does. It blows people out of the water on social media shortly thereafter and totally humiliated him by saying, yeah, you met with me and we never said anything about being okay with the 51st state. Oh, and by the way, just listen to Trump. In other words, you have no standing here, Premier Ford. So, Keith, will some people see that visual and think, oh, our man is down there fighting Trump? Maybe. But there's many of us who know that as long as he's in bed on the Starlink deal, overpaying Elon Musk to be in Ontario's internet, how highly problematic that is. And he'll go in the Northern debate and say he's delivering internet to Northern Ontario, but he's doing it with Elon Musk. So yes, will people who are following this closely understand the risk of Ford being so close to the Trump regime in that way, but having absolutely no impact whatsoever on what the Trump regime wants to do to Canada? Those of us who are informed see that. And we also know that a vote for Ford is a vote for more money going to private sector and to developers and not to people on ODSP and not to healthcare. So an informed electorate understands the risk of Ford and how performative nonsense this all is. But unfortunately, of course, in a very short election in the winter, when the very people who need to vote the most can't make it to the polls in the snow, Ford is probably going to roll in with another majority. That being said, the election hasn't happened yet. There's still a couple of weeks to go. Mark?
I found the whole thing insulting. And again, it's not, about not liking Ford or liking another party. I don't care. I find this whole campaign, this whole election to be a fucking insult to everyone's intelligence. And they are capitalizing on a moment, pretending to be and accomplish things that they have no ability to accomplish, which is protect Canada, Ontario from Donald Trump's madness. And we're not talking about, and some may say this is actually brilliant, because what are we not talking about? We are not talking about, and Keith pointed out that the opposition leaders are having such a struggle trying to get their foot in this campaign about things that actually matter. Healthcare, education, corruption in the government. We are not having those conversations. So I found the whole thing insulting. I think people need to remember, please remember, Doug Ford loves Donald Trump. Doug Ford is a phony. Doug Ford has told you again and again that he would never waver, that he supports. He got caught on tape. He's been saying it over and over again. This guy is a phony. And for whatever reason, people are falling into a trap by his little performative shit on the taxpayer's dime, I might add. While there's a campaign going on, he's breaking rules with financing his trips down there. And I find it insulting. And I'm very sad at the state of the electorate in this province. If they are going to, I saw something the other day said he may win 100 fucking seats. Are we nuts? I'm just going to tell you right now, if you give Doug Ford 100 seats, it don't matter what the RCMP says. It doesn't matter how much corruption these guys do in the next 4 years. You have basically said, it don't matter. It don't matter to me. And that's what I find. That's what I find.
Yeah. Okay. So a couple of things. We are having the conversations. We're having the conversations about the Greenbelt. We're having the conversations about corruption. We're having the conversations about healthcare. We're having the conversations about people who are on disability here on the OSHOW. And our conversations are getting hundreds of thousands of views. So I don't know what the papers are getting these days, but I just want our audience to know all is not lost. Just because legacy media is following the shiny bouncing ball doesn't mean that all Ontarians are just saying, oh, well, whatever, Doug Ford is Captain Canada. That's not what I'm hearing. It's not what I'm hearing from business leaders that I speak to. They see this election for the cynical waste of money that it is. They see this tunnel under the 401 as an uncosted hundreds of billions of dollars, probably sliding across the table to some of Doug Ford's pals. Nobody thinks that he is doing a good job in terms of managing the budget in this province. And just because he's tied up a bunch of unions with a bunch of big construction projects, it doesn't mean that the rest of Ontario doesn't see this farce for what it is. That being said, there is the technicality of getting people to the polls, and literally with the snowstorms that we're having and with people with disabilities unable to vote and not enough early voting days, it is a craven trap to make sure that Doug Ford gets another majority. The other problem, and we still have time to fix these things, other than getting people to the polls, talk to your friends and neighbors, offer them a ride, make sure they understand how they can vote, where they can vote, mail voting, whatever they need to do. We all have a role in this. We cannot just give up and cede the ground to this guy. The other thing, though, is that we saw, I think, a very distinctive moment in the race for Ontario this week. We saw the NDP effectively, in my mind, capitulate and turn their guns towards the Liberals and take their eye off the prize, which is Doug Ford. Now, it might have just been a one-of, it might not be significant, but the second that I saw that behavior, I realized, okay, they are trying to go after number two now because they've seen the polls, and as opposed to doing what I think a party of conscience needs to do, which is go after the corrupt person who wants to cause pain for the people of Ontario through his policies. So to the Ontario NDP, bad move. And I have to tell you, my strategic votewell.ca, Keith, is still telling me that the NDP have the best chance to take my riding, and I will vote strategically. I know everybody who's running. But I can tell you that there is a Liberal sea of signs all over my riding. So I'm not quite sure if that's going to hold until Election Day. I think people want to park a protest vote against Doug Ford. And I think the Liberals under Bonnie Crombie are looking like the option at this point, maybe more broadly than just my riding. What are your thoughts, Keith, on where the opposition parties are with their own attacks?
I think what we're seeing right now is actually some actual strength behind the Liberal growth. Right. There's Bonnie Crombie has acted much the last week or so. She's gotten her feet underneath her. She's much stronger, much better reacting in live news conferences. They were effective yesterday when they had the every chair in an emergency room is now a treatment. People are being treated in chairs, and they had an emergency room doctor talking about this. And he said, we've heard about a senior waiting, at 12 hours, 18 hours, someone with dementia waiting 24 hours. He said, I had a patient wait 5 days in the emergency room. This kind of thing, that kind of thing with their campaign will work. Well, another thing that the NDP seems to have an existential crisis in their identity and what they really want to represent, I think, at this point. What is their messaging right now? But one thing that they could jump on, in addition to the affordability issues, is the fact that only 18% of people, eligible voters last time, elected Doug Ford to a majority government. 18%. It could be even less this time. We don't know. February campaign, the middle of it, like who knows? People aren't paying that much attention. So that 18% of eligible voters, that means there's a whole heck of a lot of room there for other people to come in. As you said, the NDP losing focus against Ford and turning on the running for number 2 again, holding on to official opposition. That's weak positioning. Ford himself talking about the tunnel. I mean, again, if we're talking about the tunnel, 50 kilometers on Toronto, tens of billions of dollars, estimates anywhere from 30 to 40 to 60 to $100 billion, number of years. We have no actual cost estimate, no environmental, nothing, no paperwork, nothing to support this, no evidence whatsoever. But, let me do that. But of course, when we're talking about that, we're not talking about the hospital crisis, the family doctor shortage, the disability supports. And then this was the thing, Mark talked about being offended. What really offended me, and this is intentional and it's done seemingly only by conservative leaders, when he was asked directly about all the other parties, including the Greens, have agreed we're going to double ODSP rates. Ontario disability support. These are people who doctors say cannot work, okay? They're surviving on $1,346 a month. All the other parties have committed to doubling that. It might take a couple of years, but they're committed to doubling that. The Tories' position is, and it's a position, that would cost billions of dollars. We've tied it to the rate of inflation. We've boosted it a bit. That's our position. But then the Premier went on to intentionally conflate ODSP with Ontario Works, which is what the Tories rebranded welfare. And so then he launches right into the people sitting at home, laying in the basement couch, watching the Flintstones on TV. He must have had an 80s flashback there or something. I mean, the Flintstones, really, on TV? But that is just not leadership, to intentionally conflate. The question was very deliberately about ODSP, these rates. There was no welfare mentioned in this, and he just pivoted right in the middle of that answer. And we know who he's speaking to. That 18%, they were there for that kind of language. We just lump, ODSP and welfare and everyone, and, bashing the welfare bums. Really? We're back to that? Holy cow. But at least if you're going to do that, don't do it when you're talking about disability support payments. They're two such completely different programs, although people are literally starving to death, it seems, on both of them.
How Trumpian. Elon Musk is conflating, isn't he, Medicaid and Medicare, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
This idea that there are just two realities. There are the people who are wealthy and well-heeled and live in nice neighborhoods and drive nice cars and fund the Ford campaign, and therefore they get whatever they ask for. Bike lanes in their way, let's rip them out. Council's giving you a hard time, let's take away their power and take away the things that are stopping you from the zoning. Let's just do a bunch of MZOs and let people do whatever the hell they want. You want some Greenbelt land for some big mega houses? We'll break our promises and we'll give you the land on the Greenbelt. Because you know what? In Ford's Ontario, it's only the wealthy that matter. It's only the people who can help him stay wealthy and all of the PC party in power that matter. They do not care. They do not care about people in Ontario who are not wealthy. They do not care about people in Ontario who can't get to the bus stop because they have mobility devices and cannot get to doctor's appointments because they can't get a doctor, millions of them, and cannot get a physician to see them in an emergency room for 5 days because they can't afford private health care. They don't care about you, Ontario. If you are not rich, Doug Ford and the PC government does not care about you. And you might have not seen the direct impacts of their cruelty and their corruption yet, but you will. And by then it'll be too late to change your vote. So understand, on February 27th, even if you haven't felt the pain directly, even if you are not a person on ODSP who has been legislated into poverty, even if you haven't had to wait 5 days in an emergency room or seen your emergency room close, even if you haven't felt the pain of the Doug Ford progressive conservative government, you will. And by then you can't vote. So when you go out on February 27th, you send this premier a message that you don't like the way he wastes money, that you don't like the way he's taking care of the people of Ontario, and that even if he hasn't done anything to you yet, you care about your neighbors and you are not going to give him another majority. Mark?
I would remind everyone to watch. I mean, I hate talking about polling because people have very mixed emotions about whether it's accurate or not. But for anybody who knows about the history of Ontario politics, and polling, the NDP are polling right now, according to the latest that I saw, at 16%. They will lose party status if that holds. So you can look at vote well or whatever it is in strategic vote, but the reality is that if the NDP cannot climb above 18%, they will lose party status. They will be decimated, which means, it is what it is. The Liberals are the other option to beat Ford. And I think that, I worked for the Liberals. I get it, right? But I also understood in 2018 and in the last election that where the NDP was polling, they had the best chance to beat Ford. Yeah. But the reality is, anybody who understands polling and politics in Ontario is that 16%, whether you're the PCs, the Liberals, or the NDP, you will lose party status. That's what's facing the NDP right now. I'm not sure why. I think, Bonnie Crombie and the Liberals have had a rebound. I think we live in times where people are more center right than they are left now, as evidenced by the direction of this country and the United States. And so I would just remind people to pay attention to that number, because this could be, honestly, both federally and provincially, the election where people have to put aside their partisanship and decide to do what's best for the country and pick at least somebody least worse than what it could potentially be, right? So that's why I just want to also echo what you say. Conservatives, a wet dream for every conservative is a smaller government run by elites and wealthy, right? This is their, and this, we're seeing this in the United States. Like, if this is what we want here, right, then, vote accordingly. If you want, and that involves a ton of fucking cruelty, and cruelty becomes normalized and acceptable. And, if that's the world we're going to live in, I think everyone listening today and the people that listen to your podcast understand that that's not what we want. That's not the direction that we want this country to go, that we are, whether you're right of center or you're left, it's okay to care about other people. It's okay.
I think what we're seeing here provincially with the NDP and the Liberals in particular is a reflection of what's happening federally. That the Carney coronation is uniting some Liberals provincially and federally, and it's raising, the polls again. Let's talk about the trends in the polls, not necessarily the numbers, but the Liberals are up substantially in the federal polls, and I think that's helping boost Bonnie Crombie provincially, and the NDP under Jagmeet Singh federally are collapsing. What reason do we have to vote for you? What difference are you from the Trudeau Liberals all those reasons? And he's going, this would be his fourth campaign or fifth as party. I mean, talk about long in the tooth. He should be gone. So I think that's hurting the provincial NDP as well, who, as I said, seem to have a bit of an identity crisis going on here. What do you stand for here? You're going to buy the 407? We can't afford that. For goodness sakes. And that, that's the kind of spending that we don't want to hear from an NDP potential government. So I think they're hurting themselves with that. But what remains to be seen, though, is Poilievre does seem to be ceding ground to the Liberals in particular federally. But Doug Ford's not sliding very much at all. I mean, basically he's over 40% in virtually every poll. Some is up as high as 50.
Mhm.
And to Mark's point, if he wins 100 seats, be careful what you wish for. That's a lot of backbench trouble. But that could mean neither opposition party gets official opposition status.
Right.
And we end up with a Frank McKenna situation in New Brunswick where he had to appoint his own people to go ask him some questions. Those dangers exist. The numbers, the polling numbers are that, as I say, look at the trends, and the trends are Doug Ford has not slipped at all during this campaign. Any little missteps or, the hot mic, any of these little things, they're not hurting him. They're not sticking to him at all. He's a bit of a Teflon premier in this regard. In his campaign, his people seem to know exactly what they want to do, and they're achieving it. So
I don't think it's a mystery. I mean, as someone who does crisis management and communications, there's nothing to focus the mind like a crisis. And Canada is in an existential crisis right now. We now all know that. There is no more denying that we are in a crisis for our sovereignty. And the front we're being attacked on is our economy, but it's about our sovereignty. So Doug Ford has positioned himself, because of the timing of his role with the premiers, as being Captain Canada. He has more money than both campaigns put together, and he is using that effectively, and he will get back in, but he doesn't need to get in with a supermajority. He can get in with a Liberal Party potentially that can hold his feet to the fire. A minority would be fantastic. We still have 2 weeks to go. But the reality is he's positioned himself that way. So as we look at the poll trends, what I find so fascinating is, suppose Ontarians say, well, we don't know Bonnie quite enough yet, and Ford looks like he's got, this focus on Trump, which is the big boogeyman we all have to fight. So we can give Ford this, but we're not going to give it to Poilievre federally, because we're just not going to go that far. And they are looking at Mark Carney in head-to-head polls. And I said on this program, I will not consider any federal polls until I see a Mark Carney head-to-head with Poilievre. Yep. We are seeing Mark Carney possibly bringing the Liberals to a majority federally if he were to be the leader. That's before Canada even sees him for a day or a month or 6 months in the role of prime minister, standing up to the Trump campaign. And Mark Carney's comms have been outstanding. If you saw the post that he put out talking about how we're going to be the master of our own country and how we are going to build a singular economy, not 13 provincial ones, and he's going to bring the nation together, that is resonating. So Ford might take advantage, obviously, of this moment of fear and this short election before Canadians really get their head around all of this. But I don't think that's going to be the same for Pierre Poilievre. I think that right now, 100 business leaders panicking to get prorogation reversed so that they can get Poilievre in is the best indication we have that probably the Liberal brand is going to be seen as synonymous with the Canadian brand, and that Mark Carney will be seen as, I think it was one of the big papers today said, you might want to have a pilot flying this economic plane, right? Which is Mark Carney. So I have, where I'm looking at this, because, I want to be real with our viewers and our listeners, it is hard some days to get out of bed with the cruelty that we are seeing coming out of the White House, with the cruelty that we're seeing on social media from the MAGA people in Canada, the politicians, and the high profile people who are trying to push for the annexation of Canada. It is impossibly hard some days to realize that your fellow Canadians would be so craven and so greedy and so cruel that they would support a hostile regime that is trying to take away the sovereignty that our brave ancestors fought for. I mean, it is really sickening to see, and it's hard. But I take comfort in knowing that, to Mark's point, not everybody wants to be a cruel nation. Not everybody wants to do what we're seeing the Trump regime do. Not everybody wants to have anything to do with a regime that would talk about cultural genocide, of taking an entire population out of their ancestral lands in Gaza. I mean, not everybody wants to have anything to do with this fascist tyrant in the United States. And I think we're seeing that reflected in the polls from Mark Carney and the repudiation of Pierre Poilievre and the MAGA party in Canada. So there's hope. There is hope. It might not be enough time to stop what's happening in Ontario, but if Ford gets in Ontario, and this is his calculation, Poilievre's probably not going to get in Ottawa for the federal election. And so we need to stay focused on our values. I just got off the phone with a top business leader in this country, and the conversation was about, if ever there was a time to use your input, to use your influence, to use your power to promote Canadian values, do it now. This is not a time to water down how much we support diversity in this country. This is not a time to talk about mass immigration in this country. This is not a time to pull back funding for Ukraine in this country. This is a time to reject the MAGA propaganda of Canada first. That is American first. That is isolationist, nativist, goes back to not wanting to fight the Nazis in the Second World War. Reject it, Canada. See it for what it is. Fly your flag with pride for Canadian values, not for some sort of MAGA propaganda. Let's be damn clear about this. Any marches, any flag waving you're going to do, be damn sure it's for Canada as an involved liberal democracy in the world. And I don't mean top L liberal, I mean small L liberal, the liberal democratic order that supports the freedom of the people of Ukraine and the freedom of Canadians to vote for our own future, to decide our own future, to keep our sovereignty. That is what is on the fucking line. So do not fall for Pierre Poilievre and that Canadian MAGA garbage. We don't want Canada first. We want one Canada united under our Canadian values and standing up for the values of free people around the world and against the Trump fascist regime. Mark?
Yeah, I'm just going to say, this may be a little contrarian, but I actually think Donald Trump is going to help unify this country in a way that
Absolutely.
that we needed. We have the convoy fucks took away our pride in our flag. They bastardized it. They trampled all over it and flew it around like it was some kind of sacred mantra for them. I bought a Canadian flag. I have a bunch of them, but they're all up at my trailer. But I went out yesterday, bought one, put it in my front window. I'm wearing my Team Canada hockey jersey right now. I am feeling very hopeful that we have this moment may be the best thing that ever happened to us. Maybe that point where we didn't flush our identity into the United States, shit show, but we actually took a stand and said, you know what? We now have a great juxtaposition between us and them, and we are different. And so in many ways, maybe this is the right moment. Secondly, I think Trump is also may save us from a guy who, in my opinion, is clearly not prime ministerial. I mean, Slogan Boy is struggling right now. I imagine he's shitting bricks going, well, I was right there. I had it all. And then it went away. And he can't, his whole message has been how broken this country is at a time when everybody's like, stand up for Canada. We love this country. So I don't know how he's going to pivot from that, because all he's ever been is a good opposition guy. Like, he's a good attack dog. He's not a prime minister. And, what I think
stupid in the Arctic. He looks stupid. He didn't even let the Arctic know he was coming. And he's standing there behind this big thing it's like, stop. Just stop.
And he got asked about Trump, right? And this is really critical. Listen to him. He calls his political opponents wackos, and he has all kinds of names for domestic opponents. But when it comes to Trump, very careful, very nuanced, very careful not to say anything. If I'm him, or if I'm Ford right now, I'm not going down to beg and get on my hands and knees at some shit nobody bureaucrat in the White House. I'm back here saying, you know what? Starlink is dead. Right. Don't even, never again. It's dead. If I'm Poilievre, I'm like, we will unleash some of the harshest tariffs this country has ever done. We will, but he can't. So
he's trying. It's interesting to watch him trying to pivot. And he's had to pivot sharply because no more Trudeau, no more carbon tax. What's he got left? No more slogans. Someone had a picture of his T-shirt with a slogan to come written on it, because what's he got left? I mean, those were, as you said, Canada is broken. No, Canada's not broken. Even people who pay zero attention to the news, especially economic news and tariffs and that kind of stuff. I mean, it sounds like a bad Star Wars plot, tariffs and trade and all this kind of stuff. People who pay zero attention to that get the whole 51st state thing. Yeah. And they get that it's not being walked back. It's being pushed forward. And that, to me, is what united Canadians and brought this level of patriotism just zoom right to the top, higher than any level I've ever seen in more than 4 decades of reporting. No. Just absolutely everyone right together. I don't want to mock her, but my wife went out yesterday to pick up our Canadian flag and came home, and it turned out to be 12 by 20. It looks like a dish towel. So I'm going to have to go out and get another one today. But yes, that was her. That wasn't me prompting. She said, we don't have a Canadian flag. I better go get one. Because that's the way people are feeling right now. And they're feeling strongly about it because we're never going to be a 51st state. I never ever thought I would talk about any sense about a pro-war move. Well, man, I'm joining the resistance. Yeah. And we'll see what goes from there. And there was a great piece on the conversation.ca, which is done by university professors, and they get reporters to work with them to put their stuff into English. And it basically was, if the United States ever invaded Canada, it would destroy the United States, because the resistance movement would be years long or decades long if necessary, and they couldn't actually afford to keep it up because we would never surrender. And that's our advice from Churchill, and I think we need to stick to it. But to watch the Poilievre campaigns, they're struggling to, he launched into sovereignty. I get up to the Arctic, it wasn't a very welcome visit, was it? I mean, it just didn't go over well at all. Fortunately or not fortunately for him, Trump is blowing that and everything else out of the water with the flooding the zone with news, which of course makes it harder for Canada's, our normal allies that we were expecting to be speaking up for us.
And let's
are having enough trouble. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, we saw Trudeau walking in Europe with some of the European leaders, right? We're seeing an absolute push from this dualistic trade negotiation we've had. The U.S. we're their biggest customer. They're our biggest market. We've been comfortable in that position since 1950s at least, because they would protect us as long as we kept a long, open, easy border and we didn't have to have any kind of problems. It worked well for a long time. It's terrifying to watch that fall apart. But the reality is there's a whole bunch of the rest of the world and other markets that would love to work with a stable partner like Canada. And you get in a prime minister like Carney that the world understands, recognizes, and sees what he was able to do during the housing crisis in 2008 and how he protected the Canadian economy. And they understand that there's a serious, stable leader there. And in a time of great instability, we are going to look very good as a country when we have a stable leader and we have a united economy and we are willing to make the kind of trade deals that matter, and our word is our bond. And these things are Canadian values, and they might sound trite to the MAGA people out there, but there are half of the US population did not vote for Donald Trump, do not want to see Donald Trump bullying the world, do not want to see him doing what he's doing. And then there's a big chunk of the people who voted for Trump who believe that he was not going to create foreign wars, that he was not going to hurt their economy, but rather he was going to make the price of eggs cheaper. Well, that's not happening. So we talk about a Canadian resistance. There's going to be an American resistance against this fascist dictator and Elon Musk and the nonsense when Elon brought his son into the Oval Office. And there are clips of his little boy telling Trump, shush, you're not the president, be quiet. And it is an amazing moment in history to see who really is running the US. It ain't Trump. And so the Americans who voted for Trump aren't going to love that for much longer. So we are not alone in this world. We're not alone in our trade opportunities. We are not even alone when it comes to the voice of America. There are many, many Americans who hate what's happening. And so I think your point is extremely well taken, as was Churchill. We're never going to surrender our sovereignty. And when I see people out there like O'Leary and others and Poilievre with his mealy-mouthed, careful comments around Trump, I think to myself, what are you hoping to get? A bigger slice of meatloaf at Mar-a-Lago? Like, what do you think is going to be your future? A couple of deals that enrich your bottom line with another zero? For what? For throwing your country out? For throwing Canadian pride out the fucking window. And I'm including Wayne Gretzky in this.
Yeah.
I cannot buy another Wayne Gretzky product. I'm sorry for the businesses in Niagara-on-the-Lake and the Canadian workers who might get affected by my choices. But anybody who would align themselves with the dictator that wants to take our country and cause us pain, financially or otherwise, is not somebody that I can ever support again. Not for the rest of my fucking life. Your brands are dead to me. I will never ever support anybody who signs on with the Trump regime in any kind of a way. That includes Doug Ford and his love of Trump. That includes Poilievre and his inability to speak up to Trump. I mean, I don't think they understand, guys, the visceral level that this is impacting Canadians. You talk about a Canadian flag, we always hang a big one outside my house. We take it down in the winter because blizzards destroy it. Fuck that. I'll buy 20 more. And this is not just about, boycotting a brand. This has to be about what we do in our elections. This has to be about showing that while we have a democracy, we are damn well going to use it to its best outcomes. Last words to both of you, gentlemen. What thoughts do you want to leave on anything that we're talking about on this OSHOW scandal panel?
Well, I would just say, I think people should think about, when they're in the federal election that's coming up. If Mark Carney was the conservative leader, I would probably be voting conservative. And I think that people need to understand that we're at a time, and I know people keep trying to say, oh, this is, Stephane Dion all over again, elite. Guys, he's out of touch with the regular folk, blah, 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 blah. And I keep saying different time. Those were different times. This is a national crisis, and Canadians they're not going to put the hairnet guy as a prime minister at a time when nobody's really thinking about anything important. But right now, we need someone to guide. And I don't give a shit about the premiers. The premiers are whatever. I don't care about any of them in terms of what they're trying to do with the U.S. The main person who's going to negotiate us through this is going to be our federal prime minister. And we need to put, as Andrew Coyne said, I want a pilot driving the plane. I don't want a guy who has never worked a day in his life other than be a politician. Is a great attack dog, is very skillful at being an attack dog. I'll give him that. But he is not ever going to be the kind of leadership that we need to get us through probably the biggest crisis this country has faced since the Second World War. And I think we need to be serious about this. I know we live in unintellectual times and people are not thinking through their decisions, and they're drawn to populist platforms and stuff like that. The stake of our country is at stake here. And, we need to all put our partisanship aside and clearly pick the person who you think is going to steer us through this crisis, is going to be able to work with our partners globally and support the things that matter, that represent our values, and don't lose touch with that. Because if we lose this battle, I don't know what comes next. And I don't want to leave on a despairing note. So let's just say it ain't going to happen. It ain't, as Justin Trudeau said the other day, there's a snowball's chance in hell that Canada will ever become the 51st state. So Donald Trump, go fuck yourself. Honestly.
I have to wonder what's going through Justin Trudeau's mind when he sees the polls showing that not only is Poilievre slipping, Jesus, under Carney, the Liberals could get, you say one poll showing a majority. I don't know if we're there yet, but those polls, those trends are what you watch. And those trends are showing that the Liberals would have had a hell of a lot more runway if Justin Trudeau had gotten off his seat months earlier, way ahead of Christmas, as opposed to doing it. He waited till after, for God's sakes. He really hampered the party. And yet still, this to me says how truly unpopular Poilievre as a man is. The Conservative Party, people were just done with the Liberals. They were done with the Liberals under Trudeau. So we had a lot of votes, all the polls showing, Poilievre and the Conservatives double-digit leads, way the hell out in front. Very quickly, once Trudeau's gone, once Carney and the Liberal candidates made it clear, okay, the carbon tax, we got that message, boom, that's out. we're not going to run on that. We're certainly not going to campaign on that. He's left with nothing. And so it's the switch in the polls has been substantial, and for that very reason, because he was just declawed. They took away everything. He seems, as you say, timid in his responses to Trump, where we're looking for Doug Ford type strongman rhetoric, bullshit to bullshit. I mean, that's where you stand up with that kind of stuff. He seems timid in that. So this is, I say, it's got to be to Justin Trudeau, like clearly a humbling, or at least geez, maybe I should have listened to what everyone was telling me for months and months and months, and my party would be in much better position. But there's even talk that there is so strong that, because I said earlier in another podcast that, Jagmeet Singh doesn't want a snap election anytime soon. He wants to wait till October to ride it out. Apparently Carney's in such a strong position. If he wins, he's ready to call a snap. What?
Yeah.
So that shows you how quickly things can reverse. And it shows you that the love of Pierre Poilievre never existed. It was an alternative to the Trudeau Liberals. And people are fed up with some of those policies, so the Conservatives are absolutely offering some alternatives. Poilievre wasn't the one they wanted to see, though.
And that might be Doug Ford's long game, right? Get one more majority in Ontario, then slide in and take over for a beaten down Poilievre. But you know what? As I said, in a crisis, it focuses the mind. And Canadians are not going to look at third-party options when they don't look like they can make a difference in this moment of crisis. It's going to become a binary election between the Liberals and the Conservatives. And it's going to become a binary election between Canada being free or Canada being annexed by the United States. I mean, that's it, folks. That's the narrative going forward. There is only one option in that space, and that is Mark Carney, and everybody knows that, and the polls are saying that, and the guy hasn't even had the leadership victory yet. He's still not even the Liberals'
He hasn't done an interview yet, has he? I mean, for God's sakes, he's barely done a media interview. He's
not done much, but you know what? His statements are still getting out there, and let's put a fine point on this. If politics is about moments and about images and about those very powerful things that we cannot forget, when we look through history, we remember these moments. We remember the overpriced orange juice scandal. We remember the envelope across the table in a Montreal deli. We remember these moments as Canadians, as people. We will remember the Elon Musk in the Oval Office moment with his son. So what moment did we have to remember this weekend? While Trump was threatening Canada to the biggest domestic audience of the Super Bowl, we had Mark Carney put out a statement, 5 or 6 paragraphs, about how we will not be intimidated, we will not be annexed, and we will be the masters of our own economy, and we are going to build a new Canada globally. And that was inspirational as fuck. Yep. And we had Pierre Poilievre taking a photo of Mark Carney playing hockey and trying to talk about the price of this wealthy economist's shoes, as though anyone in Canada gives a fuck about how much Mark Carney's shoes cost, let alone coming from a guy who's got millions of dollars and servants and has been a politician on the public trough his whole life, Poilievre. We don't care that Mark Carney is rich and has nice shoes. That is not the fucking point anymore. So if that's the best that Poilievre's comms team has to offer Canada, they are in bigger trouble than the polls even show. Gentlemen, thank you for an amazing OSHOW scandal panel. You never let the people of Canada down. And you know what? We might have to get back together before. There you go. Believe me, there's going to be a Canada flag in my background the next time, guys. I will not miss the next opportunity to show my pride in this country. And not just my pride in the flag. It's not about Canada first. It's about Canadian values. It's about what 5 prime ministers said. It's about promoting our values to the world, to each other, and in the election booth. So let's not fall for MAGA propaganda. Let's call it out early, often, and every time. And let's make damn sure that we stand up for our country, true north, strong and free. Thank you, guys, and everyone who subscribes and shares our clips. More OSHOW to come. I promise you that. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.
When you care about current affairs, it's on the OSHOW. And when you want to get clear what's going on here, it's on the OSHOW. If you like to stay in the know, tune yourself into the OSHOW. It's the OSHOW. Laura Babcock's the OSHOW. With a lot of great guests, she puts them to the test on the OSHOW. There's no doubt they'll be calling them out on the OSHOW. Stand for something or fall for it all. Ontario, hear the call of the OSHOW. It's a podcast, the OSHOW. Laura Babcock's the OSHOW. Stay informed with the OSHOW, OSHOW.
Your merch bid.